Here.
Andy Mefford's present. Sean McCoy.
Here.
Sean McCoy is present. Dave Loomis.
Here.
Dave Loomis is present. Micah Sewell.
Here.
Micah Sewell is present. Jim Bichond.
Here.
Jim Bichond is present. Josh Schrader.
Present.
Josh Schrader is present. Caroline Lauer.
Present.
Caroline Lauer is present. Vince Caristo.
Here.
Vince Caristo is present. Mr. Chair, I have 9 members and 2 alternates present tonight. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, I think we have a full team. That's wonderful. Thanks for all for coming out tonight. The first item is approval of the minutes from our last meeting on February 2nd. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a look at them. Are there any revisions or comments on the minutes? Or a motion to approve? Okay, no comments. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I move.
Dave moves. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Carolyn seconds. Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes from February 2nd, please say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the minutes pass. Next up, we have public comment from members of the public who've joined us tonight on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if anyone is out there who would like to speak on something that's not on tonight's agenda, as I said before, please use the raise hand function in your Zoom console. Thank you, Heather. We've got the information up here on the screen if you're following along at home. I will call you names in the order that I see them, see the hands go up. Please remember to mute the device that you're watching the meeting on. If it's not the same one that you're speaking through, we'll get really bad feedback and it won't work well. So if you're on a phone, you can also raise your hand to speak by pressing *9. And then when it's your turn to speak, I will call you by the phone, the last 4 digits of your phone number, and you can use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. So I believe we have, I can get back to it, one person who's already indicated. Okay, so we do have one person who's ready to speak, Matt Larson. If we can get you the capability to speak.
Hello, yes, this is Matt Larson, Ward 3. I was just curious to know if anyone had discussed the state bill, House Bill 134, which is an anti-single family zoning bill. And I was just wondering, yeah, if you guys had followed this bill, what your thoughts were on this bill and how this overlaps with your guys' job. And yeah, any thoughts or concerns specifically about it. That's about it. I'll mute, but thank you for your time.
Great, thanks for your comment, Matt. We will make sure to discuss this at the later end of the meeting. We have a section on comments from planning board members. We'll see if anyone's had a chance to follow what's been going on with House Bill 34. And so if you can stick around till then, that's wonderful. If not, thanks for bringing it to our attention. Okay, we'll give another couple of minutes here in case there's someone else out there who'd like to speak.
Vince?
Hey, Neva.
Hey, could I, while we're waiting to see if anyone else shows up, I think I'd like to make a suggestion to the person who just spoke that they contact the county or the city or both, because they have lobbyists that work on the bills in Helena, and the planning board doesn't take positions on bills, but there are a raft of them that are quite concerning to me regarding subdivision review. So I would encourage the caller to contact the local government and ask them to advocate for certain, whatever position they support on the bill.
Great, thanks for offering that, Neva. That's really good advice. Okay, so I don't see anyone else who's wanted to speak here. I think we will move on from public comment. And next item is staff announcements. I don't believe we have any. Am I correct, staff? No indication will be a yes to that question. Okay. Okay, then we'll move on to our public hearing for tonight. So we have one public hearing. It is the Den Blecker Lot 2 Rural Special Zoning District and will be presented by Bailey Minnick from Missoula County. So Bailey.
Hi, hopefully you guys can hear me, and I'm gonna try to share my screen.
Yep, you sound loud and clear, Bailey, thanks.
Perfect. Oops, I don't want to share you guys. You guys don't need to see yourself. Let's see. I always like seeing you guys. Okay, have to fix my my phone after that. Okay, so hopefully you guys are seeing my screen PowerPoint presentation. Perfect. Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is an application for the Waldo Road and George Cates Boulevard rezoning application. The property is located at the northeast corner of Waldo Road and George Cates Boulevard. The applicant is Jason and Karis Newberry. Hopefully I'm pronouncing names correctly. And Eli and Associates is the technical representative on the application. So this is the property location, and I zoomed out further just so you guys could see where the highway is, I-90, and actually the meeting we had in January, the O'Keefe Ranch is just to the south side of this property. So we're in that kind of same area on the west side of Highway 93 North. The applicant is proposing to establish zoning for this parcel. And the parcel, it's currently vacant. It is accessed from George Cates Boulevard. The intent of the district is to provide for a transitional low density residential district between urbanized areas and agricultural uses, as well as providing a zone that could be used to meet the residential needs through the townhome exclusion declaration, or in our zoning, the county zoning regulations, we call it condominium and townhome exemption development, or a CTED, not to be confused with the TEDs that are the targeted economic development districts, completely different CTEDs. The maximum residential density proposed with the district is 1 dwelling unit per 2 acres. The applicant is working to connect to the subject property to the City of Missoula sewer system. However, the property must be zoned in order to allow for that connection. So they're proposing this new district to comply with the growth policy designation, the Meadows West covenants, and the subdivision, Den Blecker subdivision covenants. So this is the existing zoning that is unzoned on this property. The parcel to the east actually came through for a rezone application. I want to say it was 2019. It's been recent. So that has the CC2 and then the special condition 35. It basically had a condition that was part of that zoning. Other than that, to the south, there's CR2, but otherwise that's the only zoning in the immediate area. Actually, I was going to go back here. A couple of other things. So the property is surrounded by uses that include residential, some agriculture, vacant land. As I said, it's accessed from George Cates Boulevard, which is just on the west side of the property, which is an existing private road. There was a condition of the Den Blaker subdivision in 2008 that requires access to this property only is allowed off of George Cates Boulevard. They can't access off of Waldo Road. The property is approximately little over 8.5 acres in size. It is within the urban service area for Missoula. Again, it has to be zoned to allow for that proposed connection. The site does not contain any mapped floodplain, but there has been some surface flooding that has been observed on the southern end of the property and associated with springtime snowmelt and rain on snow events. There's a culvert that is under Highway 93 at this location that does drain onto the adjacent property to the east, which then flows across to the west. And there is no defined ditch that exists along this property frontage between the bike path and this lot to contain that water. And I'll get into that a little bit later with some comments from the floodplain administrator and the water quality as well. So the applicable land use plan is the 2019 Missoula area land use element, which is an amendment to our 2016 Missoula County growth policy. The land use element designates the property as rural residential and agriculture and recommends low density residential development. The residential density for this designation is recommended between 1 unit per 10 acres and 1 unit per 2 acres. So they are on the higher side for this designation. So this is just kind of a screenshot of the proposed rural zoning district, which was included as part of your packet. As I said, the intent of the district is to provide for these lower transitional low density residential district between the urbanized areas, that commercial zoning to the east, and then the agricultural uses and kind of lower density to the west. The proposed zoning would establish setbacks, building height and lot width. It's basically, so there is no density that fits for this project, the 1 dwelling unit per 2 acres. We have designation CA3, which is a 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, and we have CRR1, which is 1 dwelling unit per 1 acre. So there is nothing between 5 acres and 1 acres. So they are proposing to make this specific just to this property. As I said, they are establishing setbacks. They made some modifications to it, so they're not as, I think the CA3 is like a 50-foot setback versus the CRR1 is a 25-foot setback. So they've kind of adjusted some of that in between. And they're proposing to reduce the list of permitted uses, conditional uses, and special exceptions to just what is specific on their application. They are establishing supplemental standards, which is our chapter 3 of our zoning code. So that's things like signage and parking, landscaping, all those other kinds of standards that we have specific in our regulations. We are proposing 2 conditions of approval if it does go through. One of them is that they add under D, so over here under permitted uses in that D section, if you notice it, they have listed under agriculture, including any and all structures or buildings necessary to pursue such activities. One thing that we are recommending is that they do the same for the single family dwellings. So they add residential accessory buildings and uses to the list of permitted uses. And that would be something like somebody wanted to build a detached garage is the best example that they are allowed to do that without it listed in there. That we wouldn't be able to issue a permit for that. So that's pretty standard across all of our residential, especially our residential districts where we do have that accessory structures allowed as permitted use. And then the other condition I'll get into here in a second as well, but it's under under C, general standards. We are recommending a condition that there's language added that the construction of basements is prohibited on this property, and that the lowest floor and utilities be constructed a minimum of 2 feet above the highest adjacent grade. And I will get into that here with my next comment, or my next slide, which is agency comments and neighborhood comments. So we received basically 3 agency comments that weren't a no comment or just ignored our emails. But the health department obviously would require, they had no comments specific to the rezoning, but obviously further subdivisions, including townhome developments or building permits, would require review under the sanitations section of the Montana Code or applicable exemption. The floodplain comment, the floodplain administrator did state that due to the surface water from the east side of the highway, that as well as groundwater concerns on the west side of the highway, that were identified by the Water Quality District, he is recommending basement construction be prohibited. And he's the one that put the language for the ductwork, including ductwork, everything is 2 feet above the highest adjacent grade. And as I said, it's not in a designated FEMA floodplain, so that's different than just the observed surface water that we have. The water quality did give similar comments to the as the O'Keefe rezoning that we had a month ago. And basically they said that they do have concerns with the increasing elevation of groundwater in this area. Basically the wells that they monitor out there have been fluctuating, but are pretty consistent around 4 feet to water depth from ground surface, below ground surface. They are studying this area more in depth, but they do have concerns with topographic alterations, and therefore they are also recommending that development be slab on grade as well. So that's where that proposed condition that we're recommending, if it goes through, where that comes from. I did post signs on the subject property. We also mailed notices to all the adjacent landowners within 300 feet of the property. And I've had 2 comments that were received at all that I've had. They were included as part of your packet. They were in opposition to the request. And some of the concerns raised include the future potential townhome developments, obviously concerns with compliance with the Meadows West covenants, the drainage that we've already kind of discussed on the property, and potential evasion of subdivision review. So staff is recommending approval of the request, and I'm happy to go into further details. I know I just gave a really big overview. I know Tom from Eli and Associates is on the line as well, representing the applicant. So we're happy to answer any questions, or I can go into more detail if you'd like.
Great, thank you, Bailey. Would the developer or property owner, would you like to make a presentation, or just available for questions?
Yeah, I was going to give a presentation that's going to be eerily similar to Bailey's.
Great, that's totally fine, Tom, thanks. Are you going to use PowerPoint? Okay, it looks like we got it in motion here to give you the controls.
All right, can everybody see that?
I see your vicinity map.
Perfect. So thank you for having me. I'm Tom Anderson with Eli and Associates. We are here representing our client, Jason Newberry, to request the special zoning district for lot 2 of Denbiker, as Bailey went through. Currently, the lot is 8.3 acres. It is undeveloped. It is on the corner of Waldo Road and George Gate. It was created in 2009 as part of the Denbiker subdivision. Here is a topo map of the existing conditions. You can see there's a sewer manhole, the sewer running on the southeast corner of the property. You see a bit of a high ridge coming through in the southern area, and then a drainage easement that comes through in the northern area. Currently, it is unzoned. To the north and to the east, the properties are also unzoned. The properties range in size from just under an acre to the southeast, to just over 8 acres to the north. The other ones that you see to the west are between 2 acres and 5 acres. Directly to the east of Lot 2 is Lot 1, as Bailey said. I believe in 2017, they requested and were granted a special zoning district. There's a district allowed for commercial and a density of 1 unit per 5 acres. To the southeast, you see the CR2 that Bailey also pointed out. CR2 has a density of 16 units per acre. So it is a pretty dense designation down there. Showing again the the 2019 land use elements. You see that we are in the rural residential and agricultural, and that has density suggestions of 1 unit per 2 acre and up to 1 unit per 10. So as you can see, our zoning district is within those standards. It's perfectly in line with them. To the southeast, the east and the southeast, you see there's a commercial center land use designation. The commercial center has an 8 unit per acre density. And to the southwest is neighborhood residential, which also has a 1 unit per, or 8 units per 1 acre. Sorry. So as you can see, the property sits on a transition zone between commercial, residential, and the rural residential up here. And so what we're trying to do is create a zoning district that fits well with the county's vision for the area and creates that transition zone. Here we have the City of Missoula annexation policy map. This map identifies areas that have been looked at to support growth in desirable locations and have access to public services. These areas contribute to the logical growth pattern of the city by creating orderly and contiguous municipal boundaries. Area designation is not intended to indicate where annexation will or will not be approved in any given time frame, but it is meant to show areas that have factors that tend to meet annexation policy guidelines. I didn't make that up. That's straight off of the city policies. So as you can see, as we zoom in, our property sits right on the edge there of annexation area B. Once again, a transition zone between the residential developments to the south and the rural residential to the north. As such, the requested zoning district is roughly in line with city zoning district R80 and would comply with their guidelines should annexation happen in the future. To be clear, we are not looking for annexation, but the city has identified the area, so we felt like we should try to, go with their vision or incorporate their vision as well. So, additionally, the lot is within the Meadows West area, and the Meadows West covenants for the area, or for this lot, allow for lots as small as 1 unit per 2 acres that are to be used for residential use, single-family dwellings, and 20-foot setbacks. So that's where the 20-foot setbacks comes in, and most of the language of this zoning district is meant to be perfectly in line with the Meadows West covenants. So we are not asking for any higher density than what was previously designated for this area. So why are we going for a zoning district? Well, the zoning is required for the use of the CTED, and the CTED is an exclusion from subdivision and not an evasion, as some public comments would suggest. Additionally, any future development of this property would need to go through DEQ sanitation review in order to be approved. That's what the health department was talking about. And as you can see, the city sewer runs right to the property. The circles you see are manholes and the orange lines are the sewer mains. So, as part of the annotated rules of Montana, any development that goes through sanitation review and is within 500 feet of a public wastewater system is required to connect to that system. Per Missoula City Resolution 8181, all new developments that are proposing to connect to public wastewater systems are required to be reviewed by the Utility Services Review Committee, the USRC. And any property that is requesting utility service must be zoned or must obtain zoning. So we're in a bit of a pickle here where we are required to hook into the sewer, but need zoning to do so. Currently, there is no county zoning district that fits the character area or the visions of the Meadow West covenants. So hence, our proposed district ties together the visions of the city, the county, and Meadows West in order to keep the character of the area while allowing development of housing at a time when Missoula Valley is having a housing crisis. So let's look at the zoning district and the language here. This zoning district recognizes the need for a zoning designation to allow for broadened use potentials while maintaining conformance to the Meadows West covenants and the Den-Bleicher covenants. This zone provides for a transitional, low-density residential district between urbanized areas and agricultural uses, as well as providing a zone that may be used to meet residential needs through the townhome exemption declaration process, while limiting density to recognize environmental concerns. Planned unit developments and plan variations are encouraged to preserve agricultural lands and to enhance environmental amenities found in the area. So, as you can see, that's the language directly on the zoning district. It's highlighting exactly what I've been going through this whole time. We're trying to create this transitional zone between the higher density residential and the rural residential. The next, you can see once again, here are the densities, the setbacks and building heights. And these are taken directly from the Meadows West covenants. As Bailey talked about, the general standards, they ensure that any development in this area or on this lot is done per the Missoula County zoning regulations and will have to conform with those standards. This allows for oversight on any proposed development, whether that be a single family home or a 4-unit development. Currently, the land is unzoned and none of those standards apply. The allowed uses, as Bailey went through, they're simple, streamlined, in line with Meadow West, single family, agricultural and open spaces, some home occupation, which is basically working from home, not having any businesses that are having people come in and out, and then some special exceptions can be vetted if brought to the county. So in the end, we're asking to create a zoning district that fits the character of the area and allows development that is consistent with the growth policies of the county, the city, and Meadows West. So with that, I will open the floor to questions. Chris Johnson with Ward & Thane, the legal counsel for the applicant, is also available for questions tonight. Thank you for your time. And yeah.
Great, thanks a lot, Tom. We're gonna go to comments from members of the public before we take questions from planning board members, but thank you for sticking around for that. So with that, if there's anybody who is watching the meeting who would like to make a comment, this is the time to do that. So the same rules as before. If you're in Zoom, please use the raise hand function. in your Zoom console. And if you're on the phone, press *9 to raise your hand. And so with that, I'll go quiet for a minute and see if anyone hops on. Right now, I'm not seeing anybody. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone in the waiting room or indicate at all. So I think we can move on to questions and comments from planning board members here. So we'll start with questions from planning board members. Try and go once around for everyone before you get a second chance to ask a round of questions, but please feel free to ask a number of questions in a row when it's your chance. So who would like to go first? Dave. Yeah, you're still muted, Dave.
Yep,
There we go.
now I got it. Thank you. So I have a whole bunch of questions, and I'm sure that the staff can clear this up. And to me, in reading the analysis and trying to piece together the back and forth, city, county, city, this and that, I guess my main question is, well, if annexed, why are we moving forward this rural zoning district? Why don't we just go ahead and what was maybe suggested like an R80 in the city? They're going to need to annex to get water and sewer. And if they don't, then why not connect to water? Because there's an issue here with high water tables and sewer, and it's been brought out about, okay, so we have some development constraints on this site. I don't know why they insist on getting to a rural zoning district in the county and then annex to the city. What is there some kind of advantage to that? There's a letter from a Mr. Dan Duncan on January 26, who brings a lot of questions to the fore. I'm wondering, staff, I'm sure they can answer that. And final, a simple question is, I understand George Cates is private, but is improved. Is it improved such as in paving or other, or is it just a private gravel road? And so that's kind of the less important question. So I want to get that out there first, and I'm sure we can clear all this up, how that works. Thank you.
So I guess I'll start, and then Tom can probably jump in as well and answer this. So my understanding, so this area, it is in the urban service area, meaning it could be annexed, but from my understanding, the city is not actually annexing out this far currently. Like there's no city limits out in this area. What happens is they do a request, it's almost like a waiver of protest to annex. So if the city, they connect to sewer services, the city allows that connection, but they say, we actually won't annex you until we want to get out that far. And then you basically waive your right to protest any city annexation on that part. So there's actually not any city limits out here. But in order for the city to allow that sewer connection, the property has to be zoned. And so that's kind of the pickle of where they're at out here. And then as far as the question, the public comment question that came in, so a lot of that public comment is related to the subdivision regulation evasion criteria, which is a completely different document and different process than the zoning application. So that is kind of the two issues. Is a lot of the criteria and the references in that are actually in the subdivision regulations, Missoula County subdivision regulations, whereas the request we're looking at tonight is under the zoning regulation and the zoning criteria. There is a process, and I can get into both. We actually have it both in our zoning regulations and in our subdivision regulations as far as those the CTED, the townhome exemption declaration, basically. And there's a couple of the county allows it as long as the underlying property has gone through subdivision review according to parts 5 and 6, basically our subdivision and platting act, which this property has in 2008, or the property is zoned. And so again, in order to do a townhome exemption, they also would have to be zoned. So either way, that's kind of what they're looking at. As far as George Cates, I do believe it's paved. I think when I went out there was right around, it was kind of snowy weather. So I'm pretty sure it's paved, but there's no sidewalks or anything like that. It is a private road. But that's what's interesting is I know one of the comments was talking about the access onto the road, and the access for this lot is through that 2008 subdivision. It does have to come off of that George Cates road. So I don't know if Tom has anything else he might want to add to answer your question, Dave.
I think you did an excellent review there, Bailey. Yeah, we're not looking to be annexed right now. I don't think it's in the future for the property for a while. It's just something we figured we should contemplate for the future. But yeah, it doesn't require annexation to be hooked into the sewer, but it does require zoning. So here we are. And yes, George Cates is paved. And yeah, as you said, the Dimbliker subdivision requires that the lot be accessed from George Cates. So yeah, that's not, something we can.
Great, thank you, Bailey and Tom. Dave, did that answer all three parts of your question?
Grandpa, right out here.
I've got something going on at the house here.
Oh.
Some, I'm waiting for the real answer later on, okay? I just
Okay,
want to
that's
put
not-
that out there, not clear at all. Totally confused about the machinations for this particular project. So thanks for getting it started.
Okay, very good. Andy, you're up. I was muted, sorry. And then Shane, you'll be next.
Thank you. I have a question, and it may be sort of down the road, but I was curious about the density question. I think you said this proposed zoning district is 1 dwelling per 2 acres, and I believe you said it was 8 acres. I guess the question I had, one might presume quick math has said you could get 8 units on the property then, if that's correct.
It was
Or
one.
4 units.
Well, oh, go ahead, Tom.
Yes, I think it would just be 4.
So the question I had about that, in that section of because we're talking about the CTED, have you made any, or has there been any discussion about the net area and deductions for the special flood hazard areas or the jurisdictional wetlands and waterways or riparian resources? And that may be down the road if you get the zoning, you may encounter those things down the road, but have you guys explored that, and do you think you can get the 4?
We haven't explored everything. This is just for the zoning. It's not a CTED application. So any of that is going to be dealt with in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Andy, Shane?
Maybe I'm just trying to get to where Dave was at, to try to follow this a little bit. So we're within 500 feet of city services. Is that correct? And because we're within 500 feet of city services, we must hook into city services. And then once you say that you have to hook into city services, you have to be zoned. So that's the crux of this. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That's it.
Okay, would anyone else like to ask questions? Neva, looks like you're getting ready there.
Let Josh go.
Okay, Josh and then Neva.
Sure. I was just curious what the soils on the property were and if there's any water rights.
Tom might be able to answer. I don't have any of that information since it's not, that's usually when we get it through subdivision review. And since this is zoning, they didn't have to supply any of that, but Tom might know some of that just from their general knowledge of the property.
Right. Like Bailey said, it is just a zoning, so the soils, aren't really looked at, but I did pull that up. They are of local importance, but I was reading the 2017 Planning Board minutes, and Deborah Dimbliker, the owner who did the original subdivision, has owned it for, at the very least, 12 years. She said the property has been hayed and there were way more weeds on it than originally thought. She said she only got 21 bales off of almost 20 acres. So it's not great hayland. It hasn't been farmed. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, I was just curious if some of the water issues with it was really clay soil and keeping the water.
Right. And I'm not sure, that hasn't been explored. I will say that with the concerns of high groundwater, it would be best to get onto sewer instead of adding more septic systems out there.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
I think that answered my question too. I was concerned about the water. I think that did it. Thank you.
Any questions from other members? Well, I have a couple questions I'll ask. First of all, Bailey, do you know, I mean, one of the comments mentioned a Board of Commissioners, County Commissioners, consideration of a commercial zoning request here on the property, and I couldn't find the minutes of that, but did that occur, and did it also go through Planning Board?
I don't know of one, but that's because I've only been around for the last almost a year now. I know, I mean, obviously the lot next door did have commercial zoning, so it might be talking about that, but generally, yes, if there was a zoning request, that comes through the planning board, so it would have came through this process, the same process if it had gone through.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of remember that one coming, it's right beside it.
Yeah, I remember that one too, but that was last year and it was approved. So it's not important, but thank you, Bailey, for trying to answer the question. My other question is, the issue with water is one that's come up here in this area before, and it's clearly a concern of the neighbors with the runoff, and not necessarily an issue for the zoning as far as I understand it here, but I'm curious if the TED or subdivision or whatever occurs on this property, would those regulations and review, would that ensure that the runoff issues in this area won't be exacerbated by development on the site?
Yeah, so any development would need to go through DEQ sanitation review, which would have grading and drainage addressed in that. Also, with the zoning district, with it being under the Chapter 3 zoning regulations, grading and drainage would need to be looked at. And a part of that is you are not allowed to discharge any at a higher rate than the 2-year 1-hour flood off of the property. So you're meant to keep all of your newly generated or stormwater on the property, and that is part of the DEQ review, which would be necessary for a development.
Great, thanks for that answer, Tom. Okay, are there any further questions? If there are no further questions from planning board members, I would ask for someone to make a motion to approve the rezoning.
Could Bailey put that back up on the screen? The motion would be helpful.
Good idea, Andy, thanks.
And I'll take a stab at it. I would make a motion that the request for zoning the unzoned parcel to Waldo Road and George Cates Boulevard Rural Zoning District be approved based on the findings of fact contained in the staff report, public testimony, and written comment. The property subject to this approval is legally described as Lot 2, less MBT right-of-way of the Denblecker subdivision, Section 16, Township 14 North, Range 20 West.
Very nice, Andy. Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Sean. Great, so this is the time when we can discuss the motion. If folks would like to express their thoughts or maybe how you think you might be voting or anything else relating to the motion, this is the time. So Bailey's got a question. Yeah.
I have a question, and I lost my little raise hand button when I shared my screen, so I apologize for that. But I just realized the recommendation I put up, I forgot to put in there the recommended conditions of approval. So just if you can make that part of amendment to a motion or something like that. So I apologize for that. I just noticed.
Great. Let's just do that right now. Andy, could you maybe put those back up?
Off the recollection, there was a amendment to add a section about permitting accessory residential dwelling units or accessory dwelling structures to the single family, as I recall, permitting residential accessory buildings and uses for Section D. And then also under, I'll just read them. Under D, permitted uses, add residential accessory buildings and uses as a condition of approval, bullet 1. And bullet 2 would be under Section C, general standards. Add the construction of basements is prohibited, and the lowest floor and all utilities, including ductwork, shall be constructed at a minimum of 2 feet above highest adjacent existing grade.
Great, thanks, Andy. Sean, would you be willing to second this amendment to the original motion?
Absolutely, seconded.
Okay. Wonderful. So what I'd like to do is we'll just take the one motion. So we'll have combine those two motions into one and move forward. So we've got the recommendation to approve the rezoning with the staff proposed conditions of approval. So with that, planning board members, who would like to speak on the motion?
Doesn't seem very dense, given that would be connected to the sewer at some point, theoretically. So it feels, in that sense of like 1 per 2, I realize that's like, it could even be 1 per 10, but, but that's all. I'm not opposed to the motion per se, because that is what's envisioned there. But it kind of seems a little, not dense enough, I guess. In a way that would, maybe that's why the neighbors aren't here this time.
Would anyone like to speak against the motion? I feel like haven't heard many critical comments so far.
I guess I would just make the comment, it doesn't have to do with zoning. I think the zoning's appropriate. Transition zone makes sense. It's just a comment. It'd be neat to see how they could arrange those units on the parcel so that they could keep a lot of that as open space or a little farm or something, but that's down the road. Instead of cutting it up into 4 2-acre lots, that's just my preference. Just an observation. I'll support the motion.
They would have to, oh, no, if it's a TED, they won't have to come back with a subdivision proposal, right? So we won't see it again.
Right, the site plan will be approved at the staff level if it's a TED. Dave, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. So I think some of my questions are answered. I think the density as a transition zone is fine, even though, yeah, it's a really good question. If you're commercial in front, major US highway, to have this behind it seems a little odd, but it's okay. It works in this situation. I'm just going to say my questions were not answered sufficiently. To my point of view, I'm just going to abstain. You could, this will go forward. Thank you.
Dave, what aspects of your question? I feel like I had them answered for me, so I'm just curious what's still unclear for you.
Okay, the whole question about why you get water and or sewer and the city allows this without an explanation. They might have a policy. I'm not being critical here, but I'm going to say I'm hoping that the staff reports in the future give us better context. I know I'm bugging people about that, but I don't believe there's enough context here to make people believe about, oh, this is a good fit and this is how it all works. A, B, C, and D all fit together. So that's my point, and that's why I'm going to just abstain for now. It'll move forward. That's okay.
Great, thanks, Dave. Yeah, it struck me when we first saw this. I'm going to support this. I mean, it looks in some ways really similar to the rezoning we saw a few weeks ago across the road. An unzoned property looking for rezoning to connect to sewer. But in this case, it seems a lot, the proposal seems a lot more in line with the community plan and the growth policy for this area. So I don't have a lot of any of the concerns I had last time, even though the zoning is lower. I mean, this is what, the plan is for the area, and they're really following through with that plan. So yeah, I will be supporting this. So If there's no, would anyone else like to speak? If not, I'm going to call a vote here. I think I might, would it, anyone like to speak against the motion? We still haven't had anyone speak against the motion. All right. Well, if not, then we'll call a voice vote. So could we have the motion back on the screen, Bailey? Okay, great. So we have a motion on the floor to approve the staff recommendation to approve the requested zoning here, as well as the recommended conditions of approval by staff. So all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Great. Thank you, Bailey. Thank you, Tom, for your presentation.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good night. Enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, have a nice night yourself. Okay, we'll move on. Item 7 is communications and special presentations. We have none. Item 8 is committee reports. I believe there was a TPCC meeting today. Is that true?
There was, yeah. So we talked about the gosh, what is it? Broadway extension or Broadway improvements out to Tamarack, essentially. So from Van Buren out to Tamarack, and reviewed the updated plans and scope of that, which was pretty interesting to see and get an update on that from Aaron. And then we also reviewed the updates to the long-range transportation plan. They presented here several months ago, and they're in the process of still getting public input on that. That'll close out in about 3 weeks or so, and then they'll finalize their long-range transportation plan, and I'm sure come back with additional updates to the planning board. So that's about all we covered.
Great, thanks for attending, Shane, and giving that update, and possibly having to sit through the same presentation again at some point in the near future on the long-range transportation plan.
Yep.
Are there any questions for Shane about the TPCC meeting? Okay. Great, well, thanks again, Shane. Moving on, we do not have any other business or new business tonight. So we come to the comments from planning board members. So in this section, feel free to talk about anything you'd like. I would, Neva, appreciate if you could maybe summarize some of the discussion you'd introduced via email, and maybe we can discuss that and anything else that members would like to talk about.
Yeah, thanks so much, Vince, and everyone. I just want to say straight off, my comments are not at all directed at any individuals or, at anything like that. This is my 6th year on the planning board, and over the course of the last year, as development here has ramped up and we've had COVID, and the cost of housing has gone up considerably in terms of the median, and and there's, we even heard it tonight, reference to we have a housing crisis. And I am feeling increasingly like every time we get into a tough spot and thinking about it, and somebody goes, housing crisis. And so, and more importantly, I'm not saying there isn't a problem, there is. But more importantly, I feel like there has been less of a commitment to planning from the city level versus more of a commitment to increasing units. And, I thought we saw it really starkly last time when, in the presentation, we hear about the housing policy, but we're not supposed to consider this major plan that we just approved that has cost a tremendous amount of money. And so I'm just generally concerned about I would like, actually, let me just say it in the positive. I would really like to see a stronger commitment to land use planning and zoning in the city. We passed the Missoula growth policy 5 years ago. We'll have to update it again soon. The land use designation map that goes with that policy. And by the way, that process was the absolute best process I have ever seen in a public process ever. And I'm older than you think. I know I look young, but I'm older. So anyway, the thing is that the process was excellent. We did this great land use map that went with it. And then we never rezoned. And for 5 years, I've been in these meetings where we're asked to rezone spot by spot by spot. And that is not healthy. And even today, I drive by some places where I think, I can't believe I voted for that. So, because at some level, it fit a bunch of things, right? So I guess I'm just sharing this as someone who, I care tremendously about the community and about wanting this, I don't want growth to kill this place, and it could. So the last thing I want to say is, rather than just be a whiner, let me give some specific proposals of things that I think we could do. So the city, as you probably know, recently reorganized its offices so that now both the housing and development services efforts are all into, I'm sorry, I forget the name of it. But it's all a new outfit, a new division, and Aaron Pehan is the director now. And my proposal is to ask Aaron to come in and talk with us about her vision for planning, being part of the, what she is running here, because she has basically been running the housing half of things, right? And now has got the development services added in, essentially. I'm probably mixing it up. So, but I would really like to see some numbers that, and I'm not a numbers person, but I've been feeling like, it's really important for us to take stock of how many units are in the pipeline right now, right? How many are going to be coming on this year? How many next year, right? We just approved that plan, which theoretically could have 6,000 units. So if we're getting, or maybe it was even more than that, but, I'd like to see, where do we think we're going to put people, in this housing, rather than have a knockdown, drag out fight every time about, is this the right spot? Because otherwise it's being totally developer driven. And the last thing I'll just say is I just have been super hopeful and appreciative of a lot of really positive things that have happened in the last couple of years on the planning front, including the soup to cane plan, the land use element that the county has done, and more importantly, that they're going to zone it. And that's what we need the city to do too. The city hasn't done that piece, you guys. And it probably sounds arcane or something, but that's why we end up with these individual decisions that feel decontextualized. So thank you so much for listening to me. I really meant no offense to anyone. I just think about these issues, and I really want to see the community thrive and grow, but do it in a way that really retains what's unique about this community. And I know you guys all want that too, otherwise you wouldn't be on these board. So, and thank you. I have one last thing. The very last thing I'll say. We are asked to make decisions based on findings of fact and findings of law. If that was a formulaic process, this board would not exist. It's not a formulaic process, and that's why it sometimes feels hard. And I want to say I appreciate the time that every single one of you has put in to thinking about these issues, because they're hard. And I really do appreciate it. And thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, Neva. I really appreciate your perspective and passion on these issues. So, and I agree with you completely, personally. So thank you. Josh?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that, what Vince said, Neva. I appreciate your comments. And that last decision for me was a difficult one as well. I mean, you go spend a bunch of money with Dover Cole, who are excellent land planners, to create a plan and a vision for a community. And then you have a subdivision come along that is in the queue and it doesn't have to comply. That's frustrating. Absolutely. So hopefully we're past that and there's not going to be any more of those. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, and maybe Shane has some insight on this with the transportation plan, but got another person killed down on 93 this week, a kid that goes to Florence, 10-year-old. And, that's been 2 people here on 93 south of Missoula. And that road is a death trap. Between Lolo and Florence, their speed limit's 70, but people go 75. The only thing between life and death is a double yellow line in those center lanes. And it's just, I don't know what the threshold is for deaths before they put a light somewhere on Rowan Road but I mean, it just can't go on. I mean, every year people are getting killed on that road. So I don't think there's anything we can do about it. I'm just expressing my frustration. I don't know who makes that decision, but man, it's bad. There's just more and more people coming up and down the valley, and the infrastructure's not safe. And I remember when we were talking about long-range planning, everybody put safety right up at the top of the priority list. And so, I mean, if we're going to start someplace, that it's not just because I live down here, but I'm terrified to get on that road and turn left against traffic. It's really scary.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I think, it certainly relates to what we do, considering additional housing and development that contribute to that problem and make it worse. So I think then we will be seeing a presentation from Aaron and his team on the long range transportation plan. So that would be a good time to bring it up. If not with him directly beforehand, because I know MBT and the city and county, they all take traffic deaths really seriously. And, just one incident is enough to institute a close look at the geometry and things like that. Neva.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, Josh, because that reminded me of another thing that I would love to ask Karen Hughes to visit with us about, which is, so when you go south from Missoula and you go around the turns and you see that big field on the right, that beautiful, it's a big farm field, and then there are houses up in the hill above it. But so that is Alexandra Estate, and that is almost 100 acres of prime soil that that was approved for subdivision, not by me, but and into 5-acre lots that were never built. And one of the big issues on that subdivision is that they would be turning off from the west side of the road. They'd be trying to make a left to go to Missoula, like in the morning. And was going to be a light. Now I understand there isn't going to be, and this subdivision may come back. And the reason I'm raising this is I think it would be nice to get some clarity from Karen Hughes. I think she would know about, how long can these subdivision approvals last out there? And what does it take to change it if some condition is changed? Like in this case, a major condition, which is the access. And one of those women who died, it's actually Wally Congdon's sister. Some of you may know Wally. It's his sister who died, and she was turning off of 93 into her driveway. I mean, that's just crazy, right? I mean, in terms of, how many driveways must there be that have to access off of there? So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I guess there's two issues there, but one, been very worried about because of those recent deaths about Alexandra Estate. So, and how people will come off of there.
Yeah, Neva, they couldn't. I mean, my wife works at the Montana Migrant Clinic right there, and trying to turn left out of that driveway is nearly impossible much of the day.
Bailey, if you're still there.
Answer your question on Alexandra.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. I was going to ask Bailey to write that down and direct it to you or Karen, but please go ahead.
It's got a 4-phase phasing plan, and the phases are still active. They are in the process of going back in front of the commissioners to discuss conditions of approval, one of which is that issue of what they proposed was known as a jug handle turnaround feature, which is sort of a repurposed version of a turnaround from, I can't remember if it was Michigan or New Jersey, but that was part of the application. And the challenge that they're running into is that because of the Bitterroot Trail, they can't build that turnaround feature. So they can't meet a condition of approval essentially because of that. And so that's probably the most I can tell you on it, because it hasn't been before the commissioners yet to discuss that issue, but that's something that they're facing. But it's an active 4-phase subdivision still.
Tim, on the general question, it kind of came up tonight as well about, are there situations where changing conditions, whether it relates to, the height of the groundwater or safety of the adjacent roads, when, if at all, did changing conditions allow or call for a revisiting of a subdivision? And what does that process look like?
Well, I think for newer subdivisions since 2017, there actually is statute that facilitates that. Well, that's if you have what's called a phase development since 2017. Each phase has to come back before the governing body, and there's basically an assessment of whether things have changed on the ground that might require imposition of new conditions. That was a new statute that was enacted in May of 2017. The challenge are the pre-2017 phase subdivisions, which we think legally that statute does not apply to. So the question is for them, can you apply new conditions? We have felt legally that new conditions can be applied if they come back through a public process where they're actually asking for amendments. So Alexandra Estates might fit into that category. There might be some subdivisions coming forward that fit into that category. But we're not sure, as a matter of course, whether every pre-2017 subdivision would fit the bill on that. It's kind of a legally gray area, to be honest.
Great, thanks for that answer, Tim. That helps me understand things better. Sean, you're up.
Hey, just going back to one of the things Neva was talking about with the city's zoning, I guess I'm curious, does anybody have a sense on why the city is not getting the rezoning done? I mean, I was part of that growth policy meetings as well, right? Like, what's taking so long? Does anybody know?
Great question, Sean. If anyone wants to chime in, please do.
I just don't think it's been a priority. And you know, and I think it probably is seen as a big ask because it is, you know, and I think in the first year or two when we were talking about it, after we started to try to implement the Missoula plan and had to deal with these specific zoning things, you know, we kept the planning board has brought this up many times, and the basic, you know, reply was it's, you know, it's too big an ask, but we have talked about trying to do it area, like by certain areas of town. You know, it wouldn't be like the whole thing at once or something, but it looks like Heather has info on that.
Yeah, Heather, please.
Thank you. Not specifically, but Dave DeGrandpré is in the meeting as an attendee. He briefly had his hand up. It's back down. I don't know if he has something to add. Just wanted to alert you to that.
Oh, thank you, Heather. Thank you for that. Yeah, Dave, if you're listening and you're here and you'd like to chime in, please, and you're able to, please do. I apologize for not seeing your hand earlier.
No problem, thanks. You know, I can't speak to why the city didn't rezone after future land use map was adopted. I wasn't working for the city at that time, but I guess the reason I had my hand up for a little while was thinking about the Setupcane plan and rezoning based on that. And because I thought that's what the question was originally about. And the answer is the land the city doesn't have jurisdiction over much of the land today. It has to be annexed, like we saw with the McNett project, would have to be, and all the projects that you've seen over the last few months. Heron's Landing, Remington Flats, they have to be annexed into the city before the city council can make a final determination on it. So that's why the rezoning, there hasn't been a widespread rezoning at the city level of that area because it's not within the city limits as of now.
Yeah, well, and there hadn't been a rezoning of any areas until each individual comes in and asks for it at $3,000 a pop.
And untold hours of review. No, I mean, for me, I agree with, everything that's been said. It still remains one of the big issues for me in the planning board. I'm hoping that if, we can, as I think I mentioned the last meeting, open up more of a channel with the city council and the land use committee. I think it would be really good to hear from city council members about this. Because we've heard lots of explanations through the years as to, workload and priorities and this and that, but it still seems to me like it would be, and I think to at least you, Neva, and maybe others, a big thing that we could do at the city level to streamline development and make it easier by right. Sean.
I was just curious, who's it too big of an ask for? Is it too much for the city council to take on? Like who doesn't want to shoulder this burden?
I think the staff and every person's going to fight whatever rezone you want to do. I don't know. Dave might know. He's probably been through it.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I can add is, there are obvious staff limitations, of course, Sean. There in any given year, there's a work plan that's developed for different departments. This would fall into the long range planning side of the city's development services groups, the Laval Means, Tom Zavitz, those folks. And so, I can't speak to what their annual work plans are. I don't work in that section, but I have a sense that, there are always projects that they're working on. And so maybe it hasn't risen to the top. I'm not sure. I'm kind of speculating right now.
I mean, I could add to this. I mean, a lot of times, suffices to say that it would be a huge project for staff. I previously worked in a planning department in Bloomington, Indiana, and they had done a citywide rezoning before I got there, and the staff and the mayor never wanted to do that again. They did it, but they never wanted to do it again. It was it was a really difficult process, and you can imagine the attention and different viewpoints you have on a particular rezoning on one property. And if you're trying to do thousands at one time, certainly wouldn't be over the course of one planning board meeting. I'll just say that. So I'm sure it's something, I imagine it's something along those lines. So
yeah, just one more quick thought, if I could. This is Dave again, and that is, so under the growth policy as it's written right now, you have the future land use map with, on any given property, you have a land use designation, and then that corresponds with probably 4 or 5 different zoning districts that might fit under that designation. And so the city would have to choose one of those zoning districts. Well, the landowners might not want that district. The neighbors might not want that district. There's there are a whole lot of pieces involved, I guess. And so I guess I'm just throwing it out there. It's probably more complicated, I think, than it sounds.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think that sort of provides the context pretty well. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see if we can get some perspective from City Council in the future.
It's complicated, but you know what? The best thing that's going to happen to this community is the zoning that the county is doing around the city, because it's going to finally set some vision on the landscape. And so honestly, it's easy for me to say, but I think it's something that we should at least try to address when the growth policy comes back to us this year, because there will be an update. So let's just try to put it on that docket. And I appreciate you guys hearing my concerns generally. So I don't want to keep, if we can get done early tonight, I don't want to keep people too late.
I agree. Would anyone else like to speak tonight too? Please.
Yeah, I wanted to just thank Neva for her comments, and I agree with a lot of what she's saying. As a new planning board member, and it's interesting, we just went through orientation last week as well. I would actually like to know, something you said, Neva, struck me, which is, our job on this board is to provide recommendations, the findings of the law, but that means that we have some latitude here. But what I've been finding in our most recent decisions is that we haven't had a lot of latitude. All of the decisions were either very highly restricted based on existing law. So in the case of last week, it was, the zoning was dictated by a previous, whatever the law was previously. 2 weeks, 2 meetings ago, we actually voted against something, but then the commissioners voted it through because of a legal matter, and Dave even kind of raised, or Tim, I believe, raised the legal matter. So this is more of a general question, which is, and I don't know if this is who this necessarily is directed to in terms of staff, but I would love to understand what our opportunities are for what we can do, because I feel like all the decisions we've made have been very narrow in scope because of what. So this is the second or third time, I believe, that we've had to approve a zone because they needed to, it was the next step in the process. So we can't even talk about what it could look like because the they both don't have to tell us what it's going to look like, but because this is just one sort of like step in the process. And so I don't really feel like we're really making any substantive decisions. So I don't know, again, I don't know who this is directed to, like if it's you know, if staff can maybe tell us what some of the challenges are or what our opportunities are, but that's been what's been bothering me this meeting.
Thanks a lot, Tim. I mean, Tim or Dave or Bailey, if you'd like to give an answer or speak to that at all, I think we'd all appreciate it. But if not, if you're not prepared, I understand that as well.
Yeah, and I also don't want to keep everybody either. It would be nice to get out of here early, but I want to second the notion, the ideas that, and this could be what we do as far as action items. But you know, hearing from the city and starting that dialogue with Aaron and that new office, and you know, if Ann Hughes has some perspective as well. But it would be good to understand what's coming up, and so we as a planning board can start to formulate our own opinions about stuff rather than having to react to things and putting a rubber stamp on matters of law.
And could I just briefly respond to that? Because
yeah, please.
I think you nailed it, you know, because there's some of these decisions where you really do feel constrained by the legality. And, but these other things like the Sutupkane plan, right, was creative, it was visionary. Ideally, we're going to do that all, you know, in many areas, not just there, right? East Missoula, towards Lola, right? Whatever. I think we could really employ that more creative, visionary approach. And when we do it, these other decisions will be easier actually, because they will fit in the vision. If you follow me. Anyway, thanks.
Okay.
Looks like Shane.
Down. Yeah. Okay. And great. Yeah. Thanks. And I hope it'll become more clear to him. And it's one of the, you know, I think one of the tasks of planning board members to figure out, you know, where we can have an impact on things. And I think you're understanding, rightly so, that a lot of what we see is statutorily constrained. But you know, every once in a while, things come up where there's discretion that needs to be deployed and asked of us, and those are probably the most important cases that we see. So, oh, Dave, you're back. Great.
Yeah, I can just quickly, just a few quick thoughts related to Tung's question. So I think the planning board has, and this is actually it's a much larger discussion, and it's something that we ought to have as kind of a, you know, at the planning board level, talk more about areas where you can exert influence, areas where you are constrained, and that sort of thing. So I'll just provide a very quick, at least my personal opinion based on, you know, my years in this practice. So, but we ought to have a larger conversation. But I guess to begin with, I think the planning board has much more wide breadth of purview, or more options when it comes to planning. So in other words, when you're working on growth policies, when you're working on neighborhood plans, I think you have a lot more discretion, a lot more jurisdiction, so to speak, or no, that's not the right word, but discretion to make it more widespread, to focus on the issues that you think are really important. So to emphasize, for example, if it's agricultural preservation that you find to be a very, very high priority, then focusing on that in your planning. Or if you find housing, for example, to be of the greatest need, then focusing more, you know, giving more weight and consideration to that in developing the plans. The board, but when it comes to regulatory reviews like subdivision review, zoning review, we are much more constrained. The board is much more constrained. It's not just the board. The city and the county are more constrained as well, because there are very specific criteria under state law that we have to use to evaluate these. So again, with the planning side, I think you have more discretion. With the regulatory side, less so. It's much more legalistic. And then finally, last point, the planning board has a distinct role, I think. And I think, you know, at the staff level, I view myself as having to focus quite fairly narrowly, honestly, when I'm reviewing a development application, because that's my role at the city. I don't do long range planning so much. I do more development review. So I feel like I need to be pretty constrained to follow the law and I'm trying to protect the city's butt in some ways. Also trying to do good planning. Also trying to think about the future, but also trying to be, I take a fairly conservative approach in terms of the law. But I think the planning board has a slightly different role. I think the planning board can exercise, can be more of the conscience of the community, so to speak, in a way, and can, and you can also, and so you can act. I hope that you will closely, look at the law, look at the plans, and try to implement those plans. But I also think you can do what's in your heart to some degree as well. But recognize that in doing that, maybe city council also has a bit of a narrower mandate as well. They're responsible for taxpayer dollars. They need to be, thinking about the results of lawsuits and things like that, and need to, they have a lot of different goals as well. So in any event, I think your mandate is a little bit, or your breadth is a little bit wider than mine and a little bit wider than council maybe. And also when you do, so just looking forward, when a planner comes before you with a recommendation, certain findings of fact, if you disagree with those, that's okay. You can ask to modify those findings. You can ask to add conditions or remove conditions. You can choose not to take the planner's recommendation. I mean, that's within your, you all can do that. So in any event, just thought I'd add a few thoughts.
Thanks a lot, Dave. That was a great answer, and I hope we do discuss this more in the future on sort of more wide-ranging items that we've been talking about coming to the board, which hopefully in the next several months we'll have a chance to do that. So, Shane, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a few quick things. I guess I just wanted to voice my support for rezoning the entire city. It's hard, but it needs to be done. Just because something is hard doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. So that should happen. It seemed a little strange today to me that the city has taken it upon itself maybe to run sewer services and water services out to an area, and then people have to connect with it. Which in turn mandates that things would be zoned. Maybe this is going to be a moot point once the entire county is zoned, but it seemed a little strange, that progression that, hey, we offered you this service, now you have to do it and you have to be zoned. Just thought that was a little bit strange, maybe. And I guess the last thing is the caller earlier mentioned House Bill 134. I guess I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, but I just wanted to make sure that we were addressing that if anybody had any thoughts on it. I just looked it up. It looked like it's been tabled at this point by committee, but just wanted to see if anybody, reiterate what the caller had said and see if anybody had any thoughts on it.
My understanding is that bill is essentially dead for the session.
But there are lots of other fun land use bills that are going on. A lot of bad ones, gutting the subdivision review process.
There's a lot of bad bills, a lot, all the way across the spectrum.
Well, yeah, in the future, if anyone, looks into a bill or wants to give an update on something, I would appreciate that. I haven't been following it that closely this year. Okay, any other comments from folks? Great. Well, thanks for the discussion, everyone. Fast meeting for once. Have a Tuesday night. The rest, nice job. Thank you, staff.
Thanks.
Yeah, and this meeting is adjourned at 7:37.
Woohoo, thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.